Right here. Step out of the room. Sir, stand up and step out of the room. I apologize.
No sound is going right. No sound.
यहाँ पे edit करनी पड़ेगी ना वीडियो
नहीं
नहीं can you download that Google
Yeah, I need access. I just asked you for access for it.
I gave you I sent you a link.
Yeah, I got the link. It said you need access for it.
You get the course?
We will be beginning momentarily, but I'd just like to recognize Congressman Lugar from Texas, who's joining us and will be saying a few words in support of democracy and human rights. So let's hear the Congressman. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to first just thank the entire room and this panel for standing up to say and do the right things, because I think worldwide this is very hard times to have courage. So it's an honor to be invited here. It's not the first time that I've spoken on things on this subject and in this way. But thank you so much for this opportunity. And let me also say that the relationship that we have with Mexico is very important, but we also want to get things right and advocate. And that is true around the world. We see many countries with strong relationships. The relationship only gets stronger when we abide by the values with regards to human rights, with regards to political stability. And this is very much part of that conversation. So I have some written remarks, and I will say those now. But I know that those gathered here today share my desire to see a Pakistan that upholds our shared democratic principles, free and fair elections, freedom of expression, and the rule of law. And these are not just ideals, but they're fundamental rights that must be protected. The brutal crackdown on peaceful protesters last November that resulted in numerous casualties and mass arrests is a stark reminder of the challenges facing Pakistan's democracy. and it stands in contrast to the values of a free society. This includes the persecution and arbitrary detention of political opponents such that former Prime Minister Imran Khan. And I join the voices like Britt Grinnell, President Trump's special envoy for special missions, in condemning the persecution of Imran Khan and calling for his release. Despite these challenges, as I mentioned before, the U.S.-Pakistani relationship is vital, it remains vital, and it's vital for regional stability, it is vital for global security. However, the relationship must be grounded in shared values of democracy and rights. This must include countering the pernicious activities of the People's Republic of China, a country who feigns being a reliable partner yet is anything but that. A country that imprisons, tortures, and genocides Uyghur Muslims in its own country. The Chinese Communist Party is counting on Pakistan to ignore this, to turn a blind eye, and to further ingrain Pakistan into China's Belt and Road initiative. This must not happen. My Pakistani American friends, all of you in this room, your voices are crucial. Your contributions to American society and your role in strengthening U.S.-Pakistan ties are invaluable. Your concern for your homeland is not by saying. I look forward to working with the incoming Trump administration to reaffirm the U.S. commitment to you, the Pakistani American community, to pursue a free, fair, and democratic Pakistan and to usher in a new era of U.S.-Pakistan relationship. Thank you.
Congressman, thank you so much for prioritizing the fundamental rights of that means a lot to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate everything that you're doing here.
Yes.
August Hoover. August Hoover. From Texas.
Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Mehlaga Sabdani. I am director at the Community Alliance for Peace and Justice, an advocacy group that seeks to improve U.S. engagement with Pakistan in ways that prioritize their democratic norms, human rights, and the rule of law. We are waiting for Congressman Khazar, who is hosting this congressional briefing, to join us momentarily. But in the meantime, we will proceed and we will start. So before we begin, I would just like to say a few words about the efforts of the Pakistani American diaspora and about our movement. Our movement is grassroots, and it is not about one particular political party. It is not about one particular person. This movement is about the principles of human rights, democratic norms, human rights, rule of law, democracy, and civilian control of the military. Unfortunately, over the past couple of years, these principles have come under increasing attack by Pakistan's military and civilian leadership, in particular from people like General Asim Munir and the Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi. Over the past couple of years, we have seen pro-democracy activists brutalized and tortured. Journalists and human rights defenders are picked up and disappeared. And the right to peaceful protest, the right to freedom of speech, has been brutally taken away. But just as the repression in Pakistan has increased, the efforts of the Pakistani American diaspora have increased, and we are mobilized like never before. Over the past couple of years, we have secured the support of congressional representatives from across the political spectrum. We have progressive Democrats, and one has just entered, one of our very amazing champions in Congress. We will acknowledge Congressman Kazar. You all know him, and I'm going to turn to Dr. Sarah Bilal, who will introduce him.
Good afternoon, honorable members of Congress, legislative staff members, and ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. Sarah Bilal, and I'm representing First Pakistan Global. I would like to welcome you all today to this congressional briefing, which is held by and hosted by Congressman Greg Kazar. I would like to express my deepest and sincerest gratitude for you being the holder of democracy, supporting democracy, human rights across the globe, including Pakistan. Congressman Greg Kazar has spearheaded several congressional letters, including the letter to President Biden and Secretary of State, and he has been a huge supporter of Pakistani diaspora and efforts towards restoring democracy in Pakistan. Today, we will be discussing the Islamabad message, and we hope to achieve and enlighten people about what is happening in Pakistan, the ongoing crisis, the military destabilizing the country, and dismantling of the institutions. We will also hope to address potential sanctions against the individuals who were responsible for Islamabad massacre. Thank you very much, Congressman Greg Kazar. Everybody, please give a huge welcome.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and I'm so grateful to those of you who have traveled from far and wide to be able to be here today to talk about the events and the killing on November 26th and 27th, talk about issues of peace and democracy both in Pakistan and across the world. And I think it's so important for the Pakistani American community to be gathered and organizing to promote peace and human rights, as you said, for everyone. I'm Greg Prasad. I'm proud to represent the heart of Texas, stretching from San Antonio to Austin, Texas. And while I really feel when I came into office focusing on issues of domestic policy, it's so clear that the way that the United States treats our partners and neighbors across the world impacts our everyday lives here in the United States. And I came in with
on November 26th, Pakistan saw the most brutal crackdown on thousands pro-democracy protesters.
And the United States has a history, an unfortunate history, and a short-sighted history of oftentimes looking at its short-sighted military interests, thinking of military alliances first and democracy in places like Latin America second. And what we saw happen in Latin America, and what connected me so much to the issues happening right now in Pakistan, is how the United States, sometimes during the Cold War, because it put its thinking about US and Russia first, supported dictatorships, supported authoritarianism, and in fact, supported the toppling of democracy in places in Latin America that took generations to become. It did not serve the United States or people in America's own interest relative to the Cold War. It did not serve the interests of everyday people in Latin America. And in fact, destabilizing those democracies hurt our own democracy, hurt our own ability to work across the world for global prosperity, hurt our own ability to tackle the shared challenge of the climate crisis. It ended up not helping anyone. And similarly, as I've asked questions about what has happened here in Pakistan in recent years, I can see how the status quo of militaries supporting militaries first and not asking about democracy ever ends up actually hurting our own American people. I leave to the people of Pakistan the question of who to elect, how to run your own politics, whether your leaders agree with me or not. I know that Congressman Fluger, we're both from Texas. We have very different ideas, but at the end of the day, the question isn't whether somebody in Pakistan agrees with Mr. Fluger's ideas or agrees with mine. The question is, can the people in Pakistan choose their own path, choose their own future? And can they choose that future and be able to protest and demonstrate and vote for whomever they like without fear of repression, and even more importantly, in my seat as United States for Congress, without fear of repression that is supported in part by our own dollars. And so my first action as it related to questions of U.S. Pakistan relations was in 2023, which when I led on a letter with Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, asking that we do a review of the legality of United States military assistance in Pakistan, because we have a law. I don't believe this law should be applied anymore to our best friends versus our friends versus our allies versus anyone else. There is just simply a law that says that U.S. military assistance does come with a condition, and that condition is support of human rights and democracy, because it is U.S. taxpayer dollars that should be going to supporting peace and security, not to hurting our own values and oppressing anyone of any political party, whether I agree with that political. We then followed up in 2024 with another directive and question to Secretary Blinken. I did that work with Congresswoman Susan Wild, who is just an excellent member of Congress, expressing our concern about all of the reports of rigging in the elections. Again, we want to make sure that our role on the international stage is to make sure that we aren't saying, well, if somebody that the military is aligned with and the election is rigged, we're not going to say anything. If there's somebody that we're not aligned with and there's rigging, we are going to say something. No, the United States wants to have credibility around the world. Then we need to call a fair election, whether we agree with the results or not. An unfair election, an unfair one, whether we like the results or not. Of a country with so many people, with such a history, with such ties back to the United States, it's so important for us to be consistent. And so I and other members of Congress are willing to hold leaders of our own party to that standard of being consistent, saying we want free and fair elections, and we want all of our partners and allies to be held to that basic standard. And then here in October of 2024, with Congressman Rick McGovern and Congresswoman Summer Lee, alongside 62 other members of Congress, we asked the Biden administration to center human rights in our U.S. policy towards Pakistan, asking for the release of political prisoners, including Imran Khan. It could be anyone that was running for office. It could be any country that we're partners and allies with. This isn't about picking on anyone, picking on any country. It's about just basic fairness. And so, in my view, there's a growing number of members of Congress that are aware of what is going on in Pakistan. I appreciate that there is an increasing bipartisanship on this issue that doesn't have to do with us having an outcome that we want, other than peace and democracy and self-determination. Because if there's peace and democracy and self-determination in the developing world, then that is good for people who badly need it in that country, but also good for our long-term interest. We can't be thinking that people being under the United States thumb is actually good for the United States. It's better for people to be free, and that is ultimately what's better for our constituents as well. So thank you all so much for having us.
Millions of Pakistanis really believe that accountability is close. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you hosting this congressional briefing, and for especially at a time of such great and intense military terrorism in Pakistan.
Thank you. And I'm also really just a warm-up act for ranking membership. He's done this for so much longer.
Absolutely. This is my favorite congressman, Congressman Jim McGovern, who is also the co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. We are so grateful he's here. He's another one of our champions in Congress, who's done so much to support human rights and democracy.
I apologize for being late, but we're still organizing our committees and so in and out, and it's a little bit, kind of chaotic. But I want to thank Representative Kazar for hosting the briefing. He's great and he's a wonderful member, and for his leadership on this and so many of the human rights causes. I also want to thank Malaka Sandani, who's, she mentioned, she's my constituent, I'm a member of Congress. I want to thank her for her human rights advocacy. She's the executive director of the Community Alliance for Peace and Justice, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that I think she's probably one of the most persuasive advocates that I know. Look, as our country fights to defend democratic institutions, I stand in solidarity with the Pakistani people who are engaged in the struggle for their own democracy. And what happened in November was unacceptable. Internet shutdowns, mass arbitrary detentions, and the deployment of the military, there is never an appropriate response to people exercising their right for peaceful assembly. Amnesty International is calling for an urgent, thorough, and transparent investigation into the government's crackdown on opposition protesters, and I support what Amnesty International is advocating. But no matter who is prime minister, the Pakistani government must uphold its human rights obligations and strengthen its democratic institutions. This should include limiting the misuse and weaponization of counterterrorism laws against political actors and revisiting the 26th Amendment, which, as it stands, threatens the independence of the judiciary. There are many struggles ahead for pro-democracy forces in Pakistan, but if the tenacity of your Pakistani American constituents is any indicator, democracy and human rights will prevail. And just the final thing I would say, I co-chair a committee called the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. And I've always believed that if the United States stands for anything, we need to stand out loud and four square for human rights. We don't always live up to that ideal, but we have to keep on pushing to make it so that we can do better. Standing up for human rights in Pakistan is the right thing to do. Great.
Your information on these issues, because you have been reading letters and we look forward to sort of taking it to the next level as well and come up with targeted sanctions against those who are responsible for the worst atrocities in Pakistan. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you. And are you going to be here for a while?
A little bit. Until I told us to go back to the committee.
Oh, absolutely. Great. We would love to have you for as long as you're able. I had other remarks to say, and again, I was just talking about how galvanized the Pakistani community is. We have secured the support of congressional representatives across the political spectrum. We have progressive Democrats, we have national security Democrats, we have Trump-aligned Republicans, we have regular Republicans, and they have all come on board in terms of supporting human rights and democracy in Pakistan just over the past year. Even though we're a nascent movement, we're just getting started, but just over the past year, after Pakistan's flawed elections that were massively rigged, 368 congressional representatives voted on the House of the floor to support House Resolution 901, calling for an investigation into those elections. And then there were a flurry of petitions, right? There were almost 100 congressional reps called for the release of Imran Khan and all political prisoners who are detained illegally, as the UN and Amnesty International have told us. And then in October, led by Congressman Jim McGovern, Greg Kazar, and Samadi, we had 62 congressional Democrats sign off calling on the Biden administration for targeted sanctions against people like General Asim Munir. And so that is something that we want to however, despite all of that, at the end of the year, we did not see any meaningful change there was no consequences for the overall US-Pakistan relationship, despite all the repression that was taking place. And a culture of impunity was created. And then what did that lead us to? That led us to one of the most horrific events that took place in the heart of Islamabad, the capital city of Pakistan. And that is the focus of our discussion today. We will talk about the horrific events of November 26th, in which the Pakistani security forces used lethal weapons against unarmed protesters, killing at least 15 and injuring hundreds. 2 months later, dozens and dozens of people remain missing and unaccounted for, and they are presumed dead. Our forum today will examine various dimensions of this brutal crackdown and the cover-up that took place in its aftermath from a variety of different perspectives. We will end with specific recommendations that we believe should be pursued in Congress against Pakistan's civilian and military leadership. We have an excellent lineup of speakers who will sort of discuss different dimensions. and I will introduce them as it becomes their turn to speak. First of all, we have, I will invite actually Dr. Bhuit Pirsaga, who is a leading Pakistani journalist and former broadcast TV anchor, as well as the editor of Global Village Space. He will provide us with the overall context in which the Islamabad massacre took place, as well as the failure of Western media outlets to detect it.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Nani and Congressman Rekasar for organizing this. Congressman, thank you, Congressman Jim Michael. I just heard you comment. Thank you so much for it. And Congressman Hoover, who just left after making this comment. I have a prepared testimony. I was asked to basically wind short at time, so I quickly return to my prepared points. For context, it's important to emphasize that I have worked with top media networks, including the state broadcaster, as television anchor, political analyst and editor since 2005. I have written extensively on Pakistani politics and have been founder editor of print and online publications. Before media, I worked for more than 10 years with Red Government of Pakistan. These roles have provided me meaningful access to the top civil military, decision makers, politicians, legislators, and judiciary of Pakistan. Honorable Congressman, while Pakistan has been defined as a state moving from crisis to crisis since its inception, the Islamabad massacre of November 2024, in which hundreds of people were shot, literally at the gates of its Parliament and Supreme Court, and bodies made to disappear, like the Banana Massacre in Colombia of 1928, was unprecedented, even in Pakistan's total history. This represents a clear and present danger for US interests in South and Central Asia, and the growing instability, Congressman, is increasing immigration pressures towards Europe via Mediterranean. Asylum applications are also piling up in the US borders from Pakistan. Honorable Congressman and fellow gentlemen, but we have not reached this dangerous situation overnight. Pakistan, a nation of almost 250 million, fifth largest in the world after India, China, United States, and Indonesia, second largest Muslim nation, and the only Muslim country with nuclear weapons, with almost 1 million trained men in uniform in arms, is increasingly on boil since a military-led regime change operation in April 2022 against the government of Prime Minister Imran Khan. Since then, country with more than 65% under the age of 35, facing an economic meltdown, water, food, and energy shortages, is being run by a military with growing brutality and in total disregard of United Nations and international human rights conventions. Since April 2022, while courts have been made to collapse, more than 20,000 men and women have been arrested, hundreds have been tortured, journalists, lawyers, human rights activists, and poets have been abducted, forced to go underground or seek protection in Western democracies like myself. I left when a dear colleague and outspoken critic of military, Arshad Sharif, was chased and murdered in Kenya on 23rd October 2022. 10 days later, an assassin almost murdered Imran Khan, the former prime minister and country's most popular leader. But both criminal acts, Congressman, to this day have not been properly investigated. Biden administration, for reasons not understood, completely ignored the crisis developing in Pakistan. Attention was repeatedly drawn by Pakistani American community to brutal suppression of opposition, gross human rights violation, silencing of media, muzzling of courts, and internet shutdowns. But Biden administration kept on dodging the questions and thus tacitly encouraged the Pakistani military to continue with this reign of terror. Congressman, in November 2023, I remind you, Representatives Rekasar and Ilhan wrote to Secretary Blinken to review if United States security assistance is contributing to human rights violations. And on 28 February 2024, after elections were massively rigged in Pakistan by the military, 31 congressmen led by Representatives Rekasar and Susan Wyatt wrote to Secretary Blinken to withhold recognition of an apparently illegitimate government till a transparent and credible investigation is conducted into alleged election interference and irregularities. In June 2024, in an unprecedented move, United States Congress and House Resolution 901 affirmed its support for democracy and demanded investigation into election irregularities and interference by the military. And in October 2024, 4 weeks before the Islamabad massacre. Representatives Brett Tassar, Jim McGovern, yourself, and Congresswoman Summer Lee again led 61 congressmen asking Biden administration to emphasize human rights and rule of law in its policy towards Pakistan, and demanded the release of all political prisoners, including the former Prime Minister Imran Khan. Congressmen all unfortunately fell on deaf ears. Washington ignored the growing crisis, including increasing reports of transnational repression, filing of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. These are hundreds of instances of intimidation and violence against relatives, families, and associates of Pakistani Americans in Pakistan by the military regime for the views expressed within the US for reaching out to the congressmen and for the comments on Twitter, which is, by the way, blocked in Pakistan since 17 February 2024. Congressman, Islamabad massacre was thus the culmination of growing public outrage and helplessness against rigged elections, destruction of the court system, and silence of the international community led by Washington. It was in these circumstances that more than 100,000 protesters marched into capital Islamabad to demand release of political prisoners, restoration of the Supreme Court, and respect for the stolen mandate in February election. Instead of negotiating with peaceful, unarmed protesters, a military operation was conducted in the middle of the night. No one knows how many were really killed, as dead bodies were made to disappear, just like the Banana Massacre of 1928 in Colombia. I hope Ryan Grimm of Dropsite, who I see here, who did an investigative story, will provide more details about this massacre. Congressman, in my humble opinion, unless the US Congress impresses upon the incoming Trump administration to develop a focus on Pakistan through special envoys and demand person-specific sanctions against the officers of the military regime and police responsible for the massacre, human rights violations, instability and chaos will continue to grow in Pakistan, increasing risk for its neighbors and the United States' interest in the region. Thank you.
Analysis and for that context. Next, we will turn to Mr. Ryan Grimm, who is a journalist and co-founder of Dropsite News, which incidentally is also banned in Pakistan, and you will very soon find out why. He will share a report on how the military leadership planned the attack on unsuspecting protesters and how they covered it up. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thank you, and I know. Thank you, and I know that in Pakistan VPNs are very popular, so the ban on Dropsite is only so effective, so it still gets out there. What I'm going to do is read a decent amount of the article into the record here, just so that so it exists here. I don't really think it's my place anyway to tell people in Pakistan, how they ought to run their internal affairs. That's for Pakistanis to determine. What I can do is reveal what information I can with my colleagues in a journalistic capacity, and then I can encourage my government to try to not make things worse. But beyond that, we leave that to people who are in Pakistan or who have a connection to Pakistan. So let me read the story that my colleague Murtaza and I are saying. I'll skip over some of the journalistic filler, but we can get to the important parts. The headline was leaked information reveals Pakistan Army planned brutal crackdown on protests, including live fire and subsequent cover-up. The Pakistan Army planned to carry out a lethal crackdown on supporters of the imprisoned former Prime Minister Imran Khan in November, according to a source inside the Pakistan Army, confirmed by a second source with knowledge of the planning. The revelations of the government's multi-stage plan, which included a communications blackout, snipers, tear gas armed soldiers, strategic blockades in the heart of Islamabad, and the use of live ammunition, shows the level of alarm Pakistan's military government feels about supporters of Khan's PTI. Yet at the same time, the chilling details revealed by the source, we are providing due to the likelihood of reprisal. Along with the government's repeated denials of the details of its operation, suggests it remains confident in its ability to crush dissent and break the back of the pro-PTI movement. A second source with knowledge of the planning independently confirmed the outlines of the Army sources' information.
I could just pause. He will go on. There's a lot
That covers it.
No, there's a lot to cover, and I'm sure that Congressman has other meetings to attend. So thank you so much for coming. Congressman Frank Cologne, we really appreciate you being here and to express your views on democracy and human rights in Pakistan. He's our congressman from New Jersey.
Well, thank you. And I don't really have a lot to say, but, and you probably heard it from some of the others, but let me just comment a little bit. I think, some of you may know or may not that I have I don't want to say large, but I'll call it a large Pakistani American community in my district which is in the central part of New Jersey, near New Brunswick, where Rutgers University is. We have a number of mosques, and I try to frequent them when I can, particularly on the religious holidays. But I just wanted to say, I value democracy in general, and I know that there have been times in the history of Pakistan when we haven't had a complete democracy, but I still think of it as a very vibrant democracy, and that the people deserve to be able to have fair elections and elect leaders who are going to be responsive to them, which I think is only the case when you have a democracy. If you have an authoritarian regime or a military regime, they're never going to be responsive to the average person, the way the democratic elected leader is. So when I heard from some of my constituents about the election in February of 2024 and what happened, it was very upsetting to me. Clearly, it's been designated by the State Department as a free and fair election, and of course, there's been the crackdown since then on the supporters of the prime minister who ran in that election. He wasn't allowed to, really, because it wasn't fair. And that's just another indication of the military leaders, if you will, taking a hard line and making it more difficult for people to exercise their right to vote or freedom of speech. We passed a resolution in the House. I think I have the number here. I'm sure I'll familiar with it. And basically expressing our desire that Pakistan go back to the democratic process, and the human rights violations will not continue. And I just think the United States has an obligation, as does this Congress, to continue to speak out and support those like yourselves that believe in free and fair elections and free speech in Pakistan and throughout the world. I know that what's the term, realpolitik, there are a lot of Americans or even American leaders I'm going to mention who think the U.S. policy should be driven by what I call realpolitik. What's best in our economic interests, what's best in our security interests. But I've always felt that whether it's our economic interests or our security interests, that democracy is always more likely to lead to a government that's more friendly and more helpful to us, both from a national security point of view and an economic point of view. So I don't separate the two. Democratic rights are crucial, and they go along with economic freedoms, national security concerns at the same time. So I'll just continue to be out there speaking out against what's happening and advocating for a free and fair elections and a democratic Pakistan. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for your rights get sacrificed on the altar of strategic interests. So thank you so much for saying that. Strengthening human rights regimes actually end up creating more stability, and then that acts in our national security interest as well. So thank you very much for your words. We would love for you to say thank you. And Ryan, I'm so sorry if you'd like to resume.
I'll read a little bit.
Yes.
Okay. So I was reading from our article that was published about the November massacre, in which do we know yet how many?
Why we confirm that?
Yeah.
Wikipedia has confirmed about 13 or 14, but the hundreds of people are missing.
Right, and who may be detained, and maybe we'll hear from them a year from now when they're released, or maybe they're dead.
Presume, you see, there are eyewitnesses that also tell that how the dead bodies were taken away. And the dead bodies that have been recovered are the dead bodies of people who were shot between 4 p.m. and 9 and 10 p.m. by the snipers. The actual military operation took place after 11 p.m. So you haven't found any dead body from the actual military operation. That's what I've always been on a massacre.
So I'll continue to read briefly from the article. According to the source who provided substantial evidence to confirm the allegation, and just to be clear for people who are familiar with our reporting, we are often criticized by Pakistan's government for not publishing the documents that are leaked to us. But the reason we don't do that should be fairly obvious, that the risk to the people who leak those documents, because it's existential. It would be fatal if they were exposed. And so any documents that we publish would include breadcrumbs to get back to the original source. So according to the source, who provided substantial evidence to confirm the allegation, the operation was planned on the morning of November 25th at the Military Operations Directorate of the Pakistan Army under the direction of General Asim Munir, Pakistan's powerful chief of army staff. Under the plan, Jinnah Avenue, the main road in front of Chalk, would be encircled with stacks of shipping containers serving as a barricade. Snipers from Pakistan Army Special Services Group were deployed across rooftops, while paramilitary rangers carrying assault rifles patrolled the roadside alongside police armed with tear gas and shells. To execute the plan, the military employed a multi-pronged approach. The first phase was to sow chaos and fear. Lights along Jinnah Avenue were extinguished in the video of that happening, plunging the area into darkness. At the same time, signals intelligence teams from Pakistan's inter-services intelligence agencies jammed communications networks, which people also reported independently, effectively cutting off the protesters' ability to communicate with each other and the outside world. The blackout was designed to disorient and demoralize the protesters. As confusion gripped the crowd, the second phase of the operation swung into action. The army gave the order to fire tear gas from multiple directions, and the choking fumes sent panicked protesters fleeing. This was the prelude to the main assault. What followed next, a barrage of live ammunition, including heavy assault rifle fire, directed indiscriminately at the fleeing crowds. Snipers positioned strategically on rooftops took aim at those being hostile or threatening. The final phase of the operation involved a swift and thorough cleanup. As soon as the firing ceased, ISI units were dispatched to Jinnah Avenue to remove all traces of the violence. This included removing bodies, shell casings, and any other evidence that could contradict the government's narrative of peaceful dispersal. So a lot of this is backed up by eyewitnesses who confirmed the end that was visible. This is from the sources inside the government.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Brian, thank you so much for that report, very comprehensive. We rely on Dr. Credit for investigative journalism. And I would like to now recognize Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who is a hero to many of us and has been at the forefront of speaking out for human rights and democracy and self-determination around the world. And we are so grateful that you are here, Congresswoman.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I couldn't be doing the panel, but as I was walking, was talking about you and I about this profile picture to the propaganda. Thank you for officially made it. But we all know the United States or Pakistan has the right to protest is a right. You all know that. And of course, the right to vote is safe. And I know all of you understand that importance and understand truly part of who we are as people, to be able to have self-determination, to be able to have that kind of voice. But I agree with the Pakistani people because I've seen, when it personally seen some targeting me as an American of different ethnic background about my voice, my First Amendment right, my ability to be able to boycott, all of those things and how that's interconnected also with a similar kind of attack and suppression that we see of the Pakistani people. And we know how, and how did, the Pakistani regime respond to its own citizens. We all know by shooting them with live ammunition, by tear gassing them, beating them, arresting them, and lying about it. I've also seen that right here in our backyard, protesters and the current president sending out, National Guard and military folks to go out there against the president and to be able to have a voice and speak out. But these anti-democratic measures very much are dangerous. We know that it will lead to, the imprisonment of political opponents, as we saw and so many others. I've heard of journalists, people that even work at NGOs have been targeted simply for trying to protect the Pakistani people and people that are speaking out. But I want to be very clear because I am a person that grew up and the most beautiful, blackest city in the country, where they taught me to speak truth to power, even if my, even if it's unpopular, even if my voice shakes. I just want you to know I'm very much disappointed in my own country for continuing to be an ally to this kind of undemocratic process and just their dangerous, again, attacks on folks being able to speak up. We already dollars in weapons and military aid over the years with little regard to basic human rights. And I always tell people it's not always just Palestine that is impacted by unconditional aid or just not using the leverage that we have as a country. We see it all over the world where my own country continues to fuel that kind of human rights abuses. But we stand here together saying free Imran Khan. We stand here together and saying, free Imran Khan! We stand together again and say that Pakistani people deserve to be able to choose their own leaders and free their democratic process. And again, I'll continue to be an ally to speak out. I know it's been very difficult, I think, for many of us, including myself, to see the lack of urgency in our country to move on this issue, to even just voice some sort of opposition to what we've seen over and over again, of violence towards those that are opposed to the current regime and their actions. So again, I'm really honored to be able to be in space with all of you today. And I also want to thank all the Pakistani people who have stood with us against the genocide in Gaza. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for continuing to speak out about that. I also leave you with this, there was no Palestine student organization at Wayne State University when I lived there. You can look it up because Ryan Hertz, a researcher. But there, I joined the Pakistani Student Association. Honestly, all the Aussies thought I was so good too. I would say I'm out. I picked up some stuff, but it's what for 4 years I was a member of the Pakistani Student Association. But now, there's a lot of great, wonderful Palestine organization. It was even then, it was incredibly hard to be an activist on Palestine. It's even, obviously, you see it's even more difficult. But the courageous students and the captains and the things that you see across the country is so inspiring. But thank you so much for allowing me to be in space with all of you today. So nice. Thank you.
You are an honorary Pakistani, and for and a profiling courage for all of us, and for everything that you are going through and what Palestinians are going through, and for you to sit here in solidarity with all of us means so much, and we are so incredibly grateful for your allyship. Thank you. And we hope that you will be able to stay for a little bit. Yes, for as long as you can. I'll look at my stuff. I'm pretty sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. And so next, thank you, Ryan, for your remarks. We'll now turn to Mr. Wajahat Said Khan, a Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and Emmy-nominated former NBC Bureau Chief in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Wajahat will speak about U.S. support for Pakistan's military institutions and its implications for Pakistan's development.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Congressman, good afternoon. I've been reporting on conflicts and politics in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India, 3 countries I have lived in, reported from, and still have family and friends in for the last 25 years. Frankly, I'm a fish out of water there in Washington. I really shouldn't be here. I should be back home in Pakistan. And yet, I can't be back home because home no longer feels like home. Strangely, I have easy access to this capital here in Washington and my own capital city of Islamabad, which ironically means the city of Islam, a religion of peace and tolerance. And yet, in that city is where some of my colleagues are buried today. Colleagues like journalist Rashid Sharif, like Salim Shahzad, who were killed in the line of duty or doing what they were supposed to be doing in the business of accountability and truth. They were killed for doing their job. Today's briefing is an attribute to heroes like them, heroes who are no longer with us, but have given us the courage to carry on this work of speaking truth to power. The steady attrition of democratic rights and journalistic freedoms over the last 2 decades has seen thousands killed in my country, including dozens of fellow journalists. The pace has picked up, especially over the last few years, and has led to this difficult moment for me and some of my friends on this panel. I really should be bursting with pride being able to speak at this great forum. I mean, the congressman here is from Michigan, where I went to college, and is a local hero for so many years. But I don't have that pride. I should, because that pride should come from the distinction of being embedded with and covering over 100 of the bravest of the Pakistan Army's 250 military units deployed on some of the country's most intense front lines, seeing that country's most courageous soldiers sacrifice their lives. Pride, which comes from hailing from 3 generations of public servants and law enforcement officials. My late father led Pakistan's intelligence bureau. My stepfather served as an instructor in Pakistan's Army aviation. Pride, which comes from launching the country's first independent and Urdu and English news channels and interviewing dozens of its leaders and influencers. And yet, here I am, a prisoner outside my own country because of the way Pakistan's military and military-backed leaders have treated their best and brightest. What I'm about to tell you and ask you, I do with a heavy heart. Today, I'm asking and making a case for movement, for action. I'm making a case for sanctions. Not sanctions that hurt my country. Not sanctions that hurt the 250 million people of Pakistan, over half of which still live under the poverty line, but policies that force change at the very top of the country's Praetorian military and military-backed leadership. As this great country starts with a new Congress and administration, the US must be aware of the flaws and fallacies of its ongoing policies for Pakistan, but also the promise and potential for new ones. The US must be aware because awareness is power. And this Congress should be aware that America's lack of action around repression, such as blatant election rigging, mass arrests, internet shutdowns, abductions and assassinations of journalists and civil rights leaders, and incarceration of democratic leaders like Imran Khan, has been interpreted by the military regime as green light from Washington for further repression. This lack of action endangers not just Pakistanis there, but also many of the 1.2 million Pakistanis right here, whose families, loved ones, businesses, freedoms have been targeted by the Pakistani regime through transnational repression. The wave of this repression runs through my home province of Balochistan, where thousands remain missing, abducted by the state, to just next door in Baltimore, which is, like so many other American cities, becoming a shelter of asylum for an increasing number of Pakistanis who are leaving the country in record numbers today, even on ships which sail halfway to Europe. Numbers that have put Pakistan at the top of the world's destinations to leave and at the bottom of the world's index of countries to live in. Whether intended or not, the lack of any consequence for Pakistan on the unprecedented and well-documented human rights violations of the past 2 years have incentivized the regime to brutally drag down not just the protest of November 26th, as Movie Pirzada and Ryan Grimm have stated out, but also students, lawyers, activists, even women and children demanding justice and freedom. Freedom to vote, freedom to assemble, freedom to report, freedom to meet their missing relatives, even freedom to tweet. That's right. Just this morning, the government has further affirmed a law that sentences people to 3 years of prison time for a tweet that the regime may deem as fake or coercive. This just happened this morning as we were getting ready for this conference. Zeroing in on Pakistan's military leadership, they rashly believed that they could do more easily, they could weather any blowback for the mass shooting because of the other alternative. Mass protests were likely to gain steam and get international media attention. Attention they were scared of. That's what I'm asking for today, Congressman. Attention. Given its bilateral history with the US, given the dependencies of its military and leadership on Western aid, given that they draw legitimacy from acts of aid and support from this very Congress, given that they train here, retire here, expand here and invest here, Pakistan would be virtually certain to change its policies of repression if the US even credibly threatened any meaningful action against the senior military or military-backed leaders of that country. The years of silence of the Biden administration, driven by dependency on the Pakistani military by Washington, have been countered by the brave resolutions of this very Congress, HR 901, passed last summer, which demanded an investigation into last February's hijacked election. But more is required. Targeted sanctions against architects of the repression that stopped military, intelligence, and government officials who've been named. I'll name them again for the record: General Asim Munir, Interior Minister Mohsen Naqvi and company. Threats to stop coveted US military training and cooperation or conditions on major loans that require Pakistan to adhere to basic democratic norms would immediately lead to change. Trust me, it's happened before. To end, Washington has relied on Pakistani military for its geopolitical goals in the region for decades. But what has that dependency given Washington? Osama bin Laden being housed in a military garrison town, and Afghanistan where the Taliban still rule and repress women and hold Americans hostage, and South Asia where India or curbing the influence of China or normalization with Iran is still a far shot. And in the middle of all of this, after receiving billions in aid and arms and decades of being given either a green light or being shown a yellow one for tacit approval, lies the unreliable partner. Unreliable partner, that is the Pakistani military. The more reliable partners of America are in this room. The best and brightest civilian leaders and activists, entrepreneurs and economists, inventors and influencers are being held hostage by that unreliable partner. This action, targeted sanctions, or the credible threat of sanctions, has given the US results in the past, so why not try it again? Finally, this isn't about Imran. It's about what the millions of who will survive Imran Khan, both there and here in the US, will blame Washington in a wave of growing anti-Americanism if the tide is not turned now. There's a joke they tell in GHQ, General Headquarters, the home of the Pakistani military in Rawalpindi, that the shortest flight to that city takes off from Washington, D.C. This city has power, and it's time for the most powerful in the city, you, the US Congress, to hop on that flight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That's a very compelling your own personal story and also for those compelling arguments about why the US needs to reevaluate the relationship with the Pakistani military. And with that, I'm now going to turn to Mr. Benjamin Linden, who is the Advocacy Director of Europe and Central Asia at Amnesty International. He will share the various statements issued by Amnesty during the massacre, as well as about the broader human rights concerns surrounding political repression and democracy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming here. Thank you to First Pakistan Global and Representative Kazar's office for convening us here today. A couple of words very quickly about Amnesty International. We are a nonpartisan organization. We don't favor any political parties. We don't endorse or oppose political figures. We don't certify elections or do anything of that sort. What we do is stand up for human rights globally. We document human rights abuses in line with international law, and we advocate for correcting those abuses. As it relates to Pakistan, I want to talk first about the context broadly within the country on the right to protest. We see generally a pattern of clampdown on protests and freedom of assembly, not just focused on PCI supporters. This is also the case specifically in the case of the Baloch National Gathering, for example, in July, where we saw use of live ammunition, and even this past weekend, a heavy crackdown by police against Baloch protesters in Karachi during what should have been a peaceful and was a peaceful political mobilization campaign. We've also seen anti-terrorism laws targeting other minority groups, including the Pashtun Taghut movement and other minority groups, in what is really an affront to the freedom of association and peaceful assembly. The second area of context here that's being utilized in various parts of the country is the use of military force against civilians. The trial by military courts are conducted in complete secrecy with limited access, counsel, or opportunity for defendants to prepare for their trials. It allows essentially no right to appeal. Even going back several years to 2019, we saw military trials being used against, just as one example, a human rights defender by the name of Idris Atak, and his trial by military courts, which was completely unfair and arbitrary, as is always inherent in military trials. He had worked for years as a human rights defender. He consulted with Amnesty and other human rights organizations. He remains in detention, and we have called for his release. In 2023, we saw, of course, the arrest of Imran Khan and his trial by military courts. The protesters that protested in the wake of his arrest were tried by military courts. 105 of them, to be exact, with the sentencing of 85 of them. 66 of those remain in detention. And it shows how the use of military courts is an intimidation tactic meant to chill freedom of assembly, and it is done selectively. Other protesters were sent to civil courts. So it's done selectively and arbitrarily as far as we can tell from the outside. Turning to the events of November 26th and 27th, we saw initial reports at the time of unlawful use of tear gas and shoot at sight orders being used against protesters. The exact figure of deaths and injuries is unknown due to the clampdown on information. I know the PTI has previously stated 12 protesters were killed. They have heard numbers a bit higher. And that's those, at least those initial 12 had their identities released by the PTI. This much is clear. There needs to be an independent investigation, and the government needs to engage seriously with the PTI's claims. Instead, what we've seen are restrictions on the media, shutdowns of major highways, blockades of cities, and mobile internet shutdowns in response to the PTI protests, which speak for a larger repression throughout the country of the right to protest. Reportedly, 4,000 PTI supporters were detained prior to the protests in November across the country, and 610 were arrested on the day of the protest. Releases of these detained has been scattered. There have been some reports, but it's difficult to put an exact number on those, and still many are certainly in pre-trial detention. As far as we know, they are being tried in civilian courts, but it's tough to verify in all cases. I'm going to wrap up here with some recommendations, and I would say for any Hill staffers here, or those that may work in the administration or may be watching online, I would certainly encourage you to echo and amplify these calls with regard to U.S. approaches to the Pakistani government. First, Amnesty is calling for a prompt, thorough, impartial, effective, and transparent investigation into the deaths and injuries of protesters and the unlawful use of force, including use of lethal and less lethal weapons by security personnel. So far, these calls have gone unheeded. And again, this is not just being targeted at PTI supporters. Second, we're calling for the immediate release of all protesters detained solely for exercising their right to peaceful assembly. And third, we are calling for the end of the use of military courts to try civilians. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks. Watching and reading Amnesty International's statements during the massacre afterwards was very helpful in providing some documentation for exactly what happened. So thank you for that. And last but not least, we have Mr. Yumna Rizvi, who is the Senior Policy Analyst with the Center for Victims of Torture, who was in Islamabad at the time of the massacre, and she will now share her observations about Pakistan's changing political climate, as well as actions that Congress can take to address the human rights situation there.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you everyone who's here, as well as staff and members. As Melissa said, I was in Islamabad when the massacre happened, and I just want to share some observations of what I saw. The current climate in Pakistan, as my co-panelists have said, is unprecedented repression, with the military actively trying to control a narrative and repress any form of freedom of association and expression. The diminishing trust in the military and support for it is at an all-time low, with increased support for PTI. Despite the repression, some people are showing incredible courage by openly supporting PTI, often at great personal risk. And I'll share two quick examples of what I've observed. The middle-class conservative women, who are largely housewives, who PTI has been able to mobilize and activate politically, are now engaging in conversations that are critical of the military. This is a generation that has largely not been involved in activism of the 70s or the 80s or the current activism movements. The second is skilled laborers who belong to lower middle class or the working class, who are shop owners and small business owners. They are now naming their businesses after PTI. So we saw Insaf Taylor's out at a commercial center, and he had a poster of Imran Khan in his window. The next time we passed there, the poster was gone, and so we asked him what happened, and he said, the police came and I was told to take it down. And it was against this backdrop of increased repression and resistance that tensions came to a head in November and culminated in the massacre. Days before, we had already seen that shipping containers were starting to line up around the highways. The government was showing what it was preparing for, creating a sense of anxiety and urgency as people were rushing to complete their work and finish their errands, because it's unclear how long the lockdown would last. By Sunday night, and I have some pictures in my phone and videos if folks want to see. By Sunday night, entry and exits to and from Islamabad were blocked, and certain roads within Islamabad were blocked as well. Mass transit was suspended, riot police were out at multiple points with barbed wire, prisoners' vans were out on the streets, and commercial and business areas were closed. Mobile networks were down by Sunday night. And most people are in Pakistan at this point are used to some of these measures, right? When protests happen, when religious processions happen, but there were some things in part of this that were unprecedented, such as raids in homes and apartment buildings to find PTI sympathizers. And certain areas of Islamabad, which are 20 to 25 minutes away from Dijak, where I was, our commercial centers were also closed. We had just one pharmacy open and one other grocery store that had one light on and half the shutter was down. We were getting reports of women and children being beaten at the airport, and by Tuesday night, when the police was firing indiscriminately at Dijak, we were, again, 25 minutes from there, but we heard gunshots throughout the night in our neighborhood. The next morning, a friend of mine texted me saying they killed a lot of people, which even now to me is like blood-curdling. Throughout the night, when most of was coming on television talking about the shoot outside orders and talks of imposing a curfew, there was definitely a sense of fear and anxiety of what was going to happen. It was unclear what we would wake up to the next day. What I've heard from folks and what I witnessed was that it was an unprecedented number of people who showed up, as well as an unprecedented outcome. People did not expect this to happen. Upstar, who's a famous journalist, former country director of OSF, was live near Dijak at an office building rooftop and also was saying he had never seen something like this before. The number of deaths, as my panelists have said, is disputed. Wadiullah John, again, a journalist who was reporting from outside one of the hospitals, trying to get data and information on number of deaths or injured, was ultimately detained by the law enforcement agencies. And so this is the current climate of Pakistan. Like, this is what we're dealing with. And so for members here and for staff here, just a few recommendations on what Congress can do. So domestically, push for more robust and regular Leahy vetting, to suspend security assistance to units and individuals who are implicated in violations, gross violations of human rights, such as torture, enforced disappearances, and extrajudicial killings, all of which we've seen. Pass the 502B resolution. Efforts around Pakistan in the last year or so congressionally have been bipartisan. It shouldn't be that hard to do. A 502B resolution would essentially suspend all security assistance to Pakistan, not just specific units or individuals. And at the international level, I would urge members to engage with the EU and your counterparts in the European Parliament. Pakistan is a recipient of the EU's GSP Plus preferential trade agreement. The GSP Plus status is conditional upon Pakistan's compliance with 27 international conventions on human rights, labor, environmental protection, and good governance, including the 9 UN core human rights treaties, of which Pakistan is a signatory of 7. The GSP Plus review takes place every 2 years, And in the past, revocation has been threatened because of Pakistan's human rights concerns, but Pakistan's continued to retain it. And so I would urge members to engage with the EU delegation here, as well as members of the International Trade Committee at the European Parliament and the South Asia Committee.
Thank you so much, Yumna. Thank you for sharing your personal experience of how it was in Islamabad that very, very fateful day. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for their very incisive analysis and their expertise. Thank you all so much for giving of your time. Congresswoman, thank you so much for staying for the course of this panel. We really appreciate your help, and we really hope that you will remain at the forefront of sort of galvanizing your colleagues in Congress to in support of human rights and democracy in Pakistan. We're coming to the end of this forum, everyone. But again, as we had mentioned, the Pakistani diaspora is literally just getting started. You have seen how much we have accomplished over the past year, and today you heard in gruesome detail about the cruelty that was unleashed on unarmed and peaceful protesters and the callousness with which it was covered up. And you have seen the context within which this massacre was allowed to happen. And you have also heard how important it is for the US government to now reevaluate its relationship with the Pakistani military. For far too long, our rights, the rights of the Pakistani American people and the rights of the Pakistani people have been trampled in pursuit of strategic interests. We cannot let that happen anymore. The perpetrators, the masterminds, the architects of repression in Pakistan are people like General Asim Munir, are people like Mohsen Naqvi. We have to name them, we have to shame them, and we have to build on the letters that we have come up with, or our congressional representatives have come up with over the past year. And now at this very moment, the Pakistani diaspora is working with congressional representatives to draft legislation that would mandate sanctions, targeted sanctions against individuals like General Asim Munir, like Mohsen Naqvi, who happens to be visiting at this point. We don't want these people getting visas to come to the US. We don't want these people being able to store their stolen wealth here in foreign bank accounts. And that is what we're working for, binding legislation that will prevent that from happening. For far too long, they have operated with impunity, and we will not let that happen. For all the congressional staffers here, I'd ask you to please join the growing list of congressional representatives who've been supporting human rights and democracy in Pakistan and who've been calling for accountability. For all the Pakistani Americans who are here, gathered here today, who listen to all this incredible testimony, please join our efforts. We are, again, just getting started, but we need to be consistently engaged. Just after 2 years of congressional engagement, you've just seen what currently happened. We have champions like Greg Kazar and their incredible aides, and everybody else who's here, championing our cause. And so we need your support, and we need the support of our representatives. Thank you all so much. If you have questions, our wonderful speakers will be here for a little bit longer. You can mill around with them and ask them questions directly. Again, thank you all so much for being here.
I'm kind of sad she didn't do my intro on my work in Pakistan, but that's okay. I wasn't just there just to be there, but